Good evening. Thanks for coming tonight. Really pleased that you're here. My name is Elaine Howard Eklund, and I'm the director of the Religion and Public Life program, and I want to welcome you tonight. I remember when I got my first laptop computer. I am ashamed to say that it was 1996. I'm sure that's before some of you were born. I lived with my grandparents, and I pulled out my laptop to show my grandmother, and she yelled to my grandfather, "Come in here and see what Elaine can do with her little machine." So what had I done? I had pushed the on button, and it made a sort of whirring noise as it booted up. So advances in technology change our individual lives, and they change our communities. Times have changed. And now, more than turning on my little machine, I probably spend at least 8 or 9 hours in front of my little machine nearly every day. Most of my appointments are made via email. I very rarely take a phone call anymore. Social media, by which we mean computer-mediated technologies that facilitate the creation of sharing of information, ideas, career networks, virtual communities, are also changing our individual lives and our communities, just like computers did. As many of you know, events through the Religion and Public Life program always focus on religion and its connection to some aspect of public life. In particular, we want to use research, the best research on religion, to translate it to communities that can use that research and to change and elevate civil dialogue about religion in the public sphere. So why social media? Why would we choose this topic out of all the many things that we could possibly cover related to religion in the public sphere? So would you raise your hand if you're on Facebook? Okay. Keep it up if you're on Instagram. Okay, good, about 75% of you. On Snapchat? A little less of you. Google Plus? Okay. How many of you have no idea what any of these are? Not even one of you. So it will come as no surprise that according to a Pew report as of 2018, 69% of U.S. adults reported regularly using social networking sites, 88% of those 18 to 29. What kind of spiritual implications does social media use have, is one question we might ask ourselves. How does religion have an impact on social media, and how does social media have an impact on religion? We hope to unpack those questions and other questions tonight a little bit. For example, young adults, research shows, who use social networking sites are more likely than those who do not to believe that practicing multiple religions is morally acceptable. That's interesting. Among religious groups in the U.S., evangelical Protestants are the most likely to post about religion on their social media accounts. I hope that you'll take a chance to look at the program that you had coming in. We have put some research on this topic, just a little bit, not so much to overwhelm you, hopefully. We want to keep that to about a half a page. It's something new that we're doing through the Religion and Public Life program, is trying to put a little research out there during these programs, so we hope you'll feel free to give us feedback on that. I want to thank the Religion and Public Life program undergraduates and graduate student fellows for preparing that inset in particular, but also to Haley Hemstreet, our program manager, who has worked very tirelessly in behind-the-scenes leadership to make this program happen. We're calling tonight's conversation Religion and Social Media. Is there an app for that? Our panelists tonight are Heidi Campbell and Felicia Song. Heidi is Associate Professor of Communication at Texas A&M and affiliate faculty in Religious Studies. And Felicia is Associate Professor and Chair of the Sociology and Anthropology Department at Westmont College in Santa Barbara, California. We have put a much more extensive bio about each speaker in your program as well. Finally, I'd like to invite you to our next RPLP event, which is a lecture by Greg Kutsona, who will be visiting from California State. And he's just published a book called Mere Science and Christian Faith, Bridging the Divide with emerging adults. He'll be speaking about the book, his motivations for writing it in a very informal conversation that I'll be leading on Wednesday, June 6th at 8 a.m. So a breakfast event for those of you who like to get up early. So what we're going to do is first have our panelists, our two panelists, get up and just briefly give about 5 minutes or so of orienting remarks. And then I'll direct a few questions to the panelists. These are questions that our student fellows of the Religion and Public Life program have largely written. So they'll be much harder and more challenging questions than I would have written personally, but those are the questions that I'll bring them. And then I'm going to be opening the floor for questions for all of you. So I hope you'll be thinking about what kind of questions you might have as we're asking the formal questions for our panelists tonight. And stick around, please. Some of the most interesting things that happen in these events happen informally in personal interactions with new people that you meet through these events. So do stick around for a bit after and have conversation with someone in the foyer. We'll have some good snacks out there. So thanks so much. And why don't we have Heidi maybe go first, if that's okay. Yeah, thanks for being here.
Howdy. Thank you for having me. 2.5 decades ago, I began my research looking at the intersection of computer network technologies, religion, and digital culture. This was the age of Web 1.0, where websites and emails were the kind of top technologies of the day. And scholars like myself were interested in the 1990s to look at how were these new technologies going to shape people's religious practices, what impact they would have on religious communities, and what they had to say about how people kind of see each other, especially through the screen. Scholars like myself were interested in questions especially of community and identity. And one thing we found in those early days is that how people practiced their relationships online was becoming a new model and understanding of how people lived their social lives both online and offline. So we began to see community as a network of social relationships, which was very different than defining community in terms of family ties or institutions. We also saw that people were using new technologies as a way to empower themselves to get information and connect with people in ways they weren't able to before. And so we saw the birth of kind of this new storied religious identity, people creating and building their religious identities through their connections online. Over the next 10 years, scholars like myself began to look at the new technologies that popped up. And so the era of Web 2.0, kind of characterized by digital worlds, virtual gaming, as well as the new era of social media, became an important place for us to kind of explore how people were kind of building these connections and communities, but also how those were shaping their understandings of community. The questions moved from just what is happening online to what is happening offline, and is there any connection between online religion and faith and offline? Are these online community relationships going offline, or are they staying just in this digital context? And the new emerging question of that era really was the question of authority. How are religious leaders and institutions adapting or responding to these new technologies? Were they kind of in fear that these new religious voices that were emerging in the blogosphere going to challenge their authority? Or in what ways would we see maybe religious leaders grab onto the new technologies and empower themselves to kind of reassert their religious influence and authority in that era? And now we've moved in the last 5 years into a new era. So you might have heard the term Web 3.0. And that's really characterized by things like the semantic web, but more familiarly with the ideas of social media in the mobile phone. So now we carry the power of technology with us rather than having to go to a device. And our mobile media devices have become these multimedia devices, allowing us to engage in new spaces in new ways. And this is kind of bringing scholars like myself to the question not just of community and identity and authority, but this new question of authenticity. What does it mean to be authentically human in a digital age? Because let's face it, basically we're all cyborgs. We all have this technology in our hand that is extending our human abilities, our knowledge, and interactions in many ways that we never could have pictured or imagined. And that's changing how we see others, as well as how we see what religion could and should be like in the new millennium. And so I just offer these kind of reflections as a way to kind of say that we've moved a really long way in the last 3 decades. And I would suggest that these questions of community, identity, authenticity, and authority are things that are keeping scholars like myself busy, but up at nights trying to think about how this impacts religious communities. And this area of digital religion studies has become an area that interdisciplinary scholars from sociology, communication, media studies, and theology are grappling with. I was just last week in Switzerland at the University of Zurich, and theologians got together to look at issues of how digitization is affecting the church when it comes to business, health, institutions, and just the building intersocial interactions. These are questions that theologians say that, hey, we need to be paying attention to if we're going to think about the future of not just our institutions, but how do we speak to our congregations in a new language and a new reality. And so I offer and suggest that digital religion studies is a way that we can kind of have these interdisciplinary conversations, bringing together scholars from different areas, but also understanding that our digital culture, even if you choose to opt out of it, even if you choose not to engage with digital media, that it's still affecting and shaping our world and shaping our religious communities and institutions, and a place where we need to be in conversation. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Heidi. Hearing your journey through your research makes me very aware of how those of us who study this area are all trying to chase this moving target in exactly the same way. So my story is kind of just the parallel. I'm just kind of doing my thing over here, but we're going through the same bumps. So my research has focused on how digital technology shapes our experience of community, identity, and relationship more broadly, even beyond religion. 10 years ago, I wrote a book called Virtual Communities, Bowling Alone, Online Together, as a response to Robert Putnam's suggestion that the decline of local associations in our offline worlds might be offset by people going online. So I wanted to go and say, well, okay, let's go and see what's happening in these virtual communities. Now, this was 10 years ago, and so the virtual communities I was studying at the time were pre-social media. So if any of you were old enough to remember some of these groups, there was The Well, iVillage, BeliefNet, right? These were like the big website moderated groups that were out there. And my conclusion was basically, yes, the online world is successfully drawing people together, but that these communities are increasingly commercialized and marketed as niche groups. And so, therefore, they're bringing people together to bond with people who are like themselves, which can be incredibly productive and generative, but failing ultimately, if we follow Putnam's argument, to train them in the necessary skills of democratic efficacy, in learning to negotiate and bridge differences. So after this project, it kind of piqued my interest in the role of commercialization and the market in these online communities. And so I kind of pivoted and turned to exploring women's uses of the internet in particular. And I was looking at how pregnant women and new mothers were using the internet to search for information and community. And then I went on to look at the cultural phenomenon of mom blogging as an act of professionalization and entrepreneurship for women with children. Now, in both of these projects, I was really interested in how the dominant ideologies of motherhood drove these women to turn to the digital world to perform their competence as mothers and also pursue social legitimacy. And in that process, again, my interest was in how that market was kind of intersecting that journey for them as they sought these particularly social legitimate identities. So currently I'm kind of pivoting again, and I love hearing Heidi's research ending with your recent trip to Switzerland, because I'm pivoting again here to work on a project that is looking at how our contemporary digital habits are impacting our experiences of personhood, of time and place. And so it's a book project that's written mainly for those who are kind of feeling an increasing unease about the dictates of digital life. put in kind of more common language those of us that are sick and tired of our email and are starting to realize that we constantly are checking and wondering, is this what my life is going to look like for the next 40, 50 years. So it's really a project that's addressing people who are kind of feeling a little uncomfortable, and I'm trying to offer a sociological diagnosis of why our digitally saturated world today is so culturally persuasive to us. That is, why is it so compelling to us? And then what I'm trying to do is pull in some theology to unpack the quiet but troubling effects of our digital habits on personal and soul formation. So I'm trying to bring in some theological anthropology and merging it with a sociological understanding of cultural change. And I'm proposing an alternative approach to our relationship with digital technologies. I want to make an argument that we need to think more seriously about how, as human beings, we are fundamentally embodied, and we have to kind of deal with that somehow. Though lots of things, wonderful things can happen when in a non-embodied way, but we still are kind of stuck with our bodies, and we have to figure out what to do with that. And they're important to us. And that as human beings, we are also embedded in institutions. So that's kind of the sociological piece of it. And what do we do with that? And that there's so much of social media right now that is constantly pulling us out of our bodies, pulling us out of our institutions, trying to puzzle through what do we do with that? And how do we negotiate that tension that I think many of us feel? So looking forward to participating in this panel with you all.
Really appreciate those remarks. I'm sort of mulling them over, even if I'm thinking about questions I'm going to ask. So the first question I want to ask the two of you is thinking a little bit about religion and social media. And I'm very interested to hear really how you answer this differently. What impact does social media have on our faith lives or how we think about religion more broadly in society? I think you could answer it from sort of a personal spiritual point of view or a larger macro point of view, however you think.
I think that technology is, I've had this conversation with a few people just already this evening, that it's a double-edged sword, and that it has opportunities and it has challenges within it. I think individuals, one of the things technology is allowing, especially digital technology, is allowing people to have a 24/7 experience of their spirituality in ways they couldn't before. So whether it's connecting with people from their church or community, or kind of being able to expand their idea of who's part of their spiritual network through those connections. And also, with the advent of social media and apps, it allows people to find and target resources that kind of make their spiritual journey something that's much more integrated into their everyday lives rather than just moments. So I think technology has this ability to extend people's spirituality in ways and keep them accountable as it didn't before. But then obviously one of the challenges of digital culture is that it's very much of an individualized experience. And so those experiences and those technologies are outside the institution, the community. So what can bring them closer together can also be something that isolates them or individualizes them to the point that they can become disconnected. So it goes both ways.
I think social media and technology have a way of both reproducing what already exists in our engagement of religion, and also amplifying it. And so I think depending on how people are already relating to religion and how they engage it in their identities, social media is often just making it more so. The twist to it, I would say, is that because the social media that most of us engage, like Facebook or Instagram or Snapchat right there, they're on proprietary platforms that the social platforms are basically putting our religious identity in as a demographic, just as our gender and our race and so forth. And so I would argue that we can engage in our religious identities more so online, but there is also a way in which that religious identity can be potentially flattened out into yet just another feature of our identity used as a marketing, just another kind of demographic that we are pitched to. And again, that depends on how you engage your religiosity.
When my daughter was about 4 years old, our television broke. You know, just like a plain television, like not anything special. And and she like went up to it and she started like touching the screen. You know, it's trying to scan it with it, right? Because screens that were not touch screens were unfamiliar to her, and she thought she might be able to fix it by touching the screen in a special way. So I think that kind of came home to me that there's definitely a sort of generational divide in social media use, right? We see that statistically, but I wonder what other ways that might show up. So, and Heidi has done some of this work, I know, that young adults, you know, of course, using social media more than people who are older adults. So that's sort of obvious truism. But I wonder how that affects religion. So young adults are also less religious in a conventional sense than many older adults. And so how do we see, you know, these trends working together, and how do you think about, you know, will young people take advantage of new media to practice religion in new ways? You know, it's like watching services that are live streamed, or is sort of how do you see that playing out? I don't care who goes first.
I'll go for it. I don't study this, so I'm going to go anecdotal, and I'll let Heidi do the research. Exactly. Exactly. I think there are lots of very mundane ways to use social media, that young people use social media. So, you know, the Instagram with the Bible verses and the sunset, right? The inspirational quotes, right? Just sort of very mundane sorts of uses. Yes. Oh, most certainly. Right. So that's fine, right? But it's a kind of mundane use of the social media. Then I think there's kind of a little more interesting use is, and you mentioned this with the question of authority and blogs. I think for many young people, what social media and the internet today offers are many different voices, right? So especially if you're feeling somewhat disaffected by the religious institution that you may have been raised in, right, that you have some questions, there are these new voices that are very accessible now to you through various bloggers, right, that you don't have to go and find, right, you don't have to drive hours and hours away or read their book. You could just find what they're writing and follow them, right? And so there are some really influential bloggers, I think, that a lot of young people follow to kind of work out a lot of their questions and to sort out their faith, which I think is really interesting. My question would be whether there are even more interesting ways to use social media to kind of mediate your religiosity, and maybe you know some of the kind of more radically interesting ways that people are using it.
I think it's really interesting. We've seen a shift in the last 20 years in how people kind of use digital technology, especially young people. But you know, some of you may have heard the categories of digital immigrant and digital native. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, my Generation Xers and below, we were digital immigrants in the sense that, you know, most of us got online, high school to college age. And so how did we deal with that new media environment? Well, we kind of took the cues and clues from like other media environments, like how do you deal with the television? How do you use it to gather information? Oh, writing an email, okay, I'll use the clues of how you write a letter. And so we were taking kind of traditional mass media and offline kind of practices and trying to import them online. And that's what you saw kind of with the first generation of people using digital media for building communities, talking making, religious websites, cyber churches. They were trying to model the offline and import it to the online context. Now we have a generation, and I think of my students who, they don't remember the world before the internet, let alone, or email, or even social media. They don't, and so they're learning their social cues of how you communicate from their digital experiences, and the digital world is how they're bringing is shaping how they interact. And so I think, we often, scholars like myself, we're saying, okay, well, how are they navigating this space? But they're not navigating this space. They're trying to navigate the offline in light of the online. And, so I think, it's just a very different logic if you've been thinking about how do they use it for religious purposes. They're doing religion online, and then they're trying to find an equivalent offline to talk about it. And I think, in some ways this is new, in some ways it's not, because we've had this trend of believing but not belonging, which we've talked about in sociology for years with like Grace Davies' work, that people have a sense of spirituality and they use the resources of their generation to kind of sort that out. They may not be as affiliated with religious communities or institutions, but they still have the sense of, how do we talk about religion? So, one of the most popular tags on Instagram is blessed, hashtag blessed. And it's both a religious and a non-religious kind of connotation. It's like it's about how has the world kind of made me a better person, or how is the world blessing me? And I've seen people use it in both kind of religious and non-religious discourses. So I think that we're having this different cultural milieu. And some of the things I said about my research 20 years ago, I'm having to go back and recontextualize, because I realized there's a different world that's happening, especially in the last 5 to 7 years, than I saw 20 years ago.
If I may ask a question specifically about your research that the students were, sorry, to not use my microphone, that the students were very interested in. So you've written about how people have used religious language to describe technologies. So, for example, the first iPhone is the Jesus phone. And so if you continue to see religious language used to describe new technologies, or we're interested in language and technology?
Well, there's a long history of looking and describing technology in religious terms with religious language. And in my work on looking at how the iPhone became called the Jesus phone and what kind of the religious imagery that got circulated, kind of found that whether you go back and look at the history of computers, or even the history of radio, the history of the telephone with Alexander Graham Bell and his background in spiritualism, you get these metaphors that, seeing technology as magic. It's this mystical entity, and so technology enhances humanity. And so the idea that technology itself has this kind of mystical quality. And then there's also the metaphor of technology as divine. So actually other people say, no, technology actually has a godlike property. And so we kind of treat it as a holy thing, not to be questioned, and to kind of, basically structure our world. Or we can see technology as a religion, as basically providing a tool for empowerment that may make us godlike. And so these kind of metaphors, kind of get circulated every time a new technology gets up, and it's ways for people to relate. Is it something that's empowering me? Is it something outside me? Or is it something that I can actually journey through to kind of understand that other world that's beyond? And so we see that constantly again and again, with different technologies, or religious language and ideals being infused in within them.
There's definitely an age divide in how social media is used, right? You, I think, aptly stated the digital native versus digital immigrant divide. What about other kinds of divides and their religious implications? So are there racial divides in how social media is used, or social class divides, and what kind of religious implications might those have?
Well, I think, the Pew American Internet Life Project has done a really good job, and about every 18 months it comes out with a new study looking at the demographics of, what are the major technologies being used, and kind of how it differs between different class and race, gender, and whatnot. And I think what we're finding is that that especially as the internet is becoming more and more pervasive, a lot of the divides, at least within urban settings, are disappearing, because people have more and more access. It's becoming cheaper through things like smartphones and cell phones. And again, places, I remember the day when we would, people would walk around and you're looking for that Wi-Fi broadband signal 10 years ago, and now it's just so commonplace. So I think that, again, there are still, the digital divide is very evident in certain areas, but I think it's becoming, in the Western context, more and more erased. And so I think that that's, that again, that means that it's become commonplace, but then the people that are kind of cut out of that are even more disadvantaged in their access. And especially when it comes to different churches that don't have the budget for, someone to be a web designer or to have a tech team to, to create a website, to make their resources digital. I know a lot of churches say that if we don't have a digital presence, now you're almost invisible, and that's a challenge for a lot of denominations that don't have the resources for those tools.
Yeah, I would say ditto. The access issue is not the issue anymore, right? That people have access, but that the divides that might exist are more about what are we using it for, right? And what kinds of skills can we bring to use to be building content, right? And having that slick website or social media presence. I think there's still something interesting to think about in terms of what is available online, that is what draws people there. And so I think there are more diverse voices still, right, online than in kind of conventional, traditional media, whether it's newspapers, magazines, and so forth. And so I think you still do find a lot of people, people of color, people from different socioeconomic backgrounds, right, kind of flocking to different parts of the internet, shall we say, and finding like-minded people where there might not be within their immediate community. And I think that's worth paying attention to.
Can I ask you a follow-up? Ask you a follow-up question on that, or maybe, and both of you can answer if you want to. So, does it break down? Does the possibility of online community break down social divides or enhance them? Right? I mean, and obviously, it's not an either/or necessarily. And what kind of religious implications might that have? I mean, I wonder that all the time. Obviously, there's the possibility of meeting people. What does it mean to meet people in these sort of disembodied states, I think, as you correctly pointed out. And yet, is there really the possibility of meeting people who are different from you and really instantiating those relationships?
Mm-hmm. I think it's definitely possible to have incredibly meaningful engagements with people online, and that it's often not just exclusively online, that the offline and online is much more blurry than I think all of us live that. The question is, who are these people? And as you're getting at, are they different from us? I think our human instinct is to spend time with people that are like us, and certainly the online affords that choice for us. But I think in addition to that, our social media platforms and our search engines all work by algorithms that are driving the content, right, in particular ways. So, years ago, Eli Pariser, right, his TED Talk on filter bubble, right, talked about how these filters are they're sending us the feed content and the search, what you Google and what I Google, we Google the same keywords, but we're going to get different things based on what we've searched before, right? And so that type of filtering that's happening without our knowledge, consent, control, right? I think those sorts of algorithms are what then, even if we don't want to, right? Like even if you don't want to only be confronted with content that is perhaps favorable to your particular position, right? It's very difficult. Like you have to work really hard, right, on the social media feeds to get the other voices. You have to be incredibly intentional. It's possible, right? But you have to kind of work against the algorithm to make it happen. And so I would say that our social media right now is it's just slanted in a particular way that makes it very difficult to find people of true difference to engage.
I remember during my PhD days in the late 1990s reading Bill Gates' autobiography, The Road Ahead. And I remember when he was talking about the future of the internet, he said something to the fact that the internet has the potential to unite us in new transformative ways or divide us, depending on which road we take. And one of the things that scholars who study, especially community and the internet, have found over and over again that online communities predominantly build homogeneity. That it's the idea of finding like minds that have a certain criteria of certain characteristics or beliefs, and it allows you to find your tribe. And that's the beauty of social media, that allows you to find, if you're interested in process theology and you live in a small town in the middle of nowhere, you can find someone online that shares that belief and have that discourse. If you're feeling alienated because of your sexuality or gender or race, you can find a community of people that understand experience. But that's also the danger, because what the internet and online communities have a tendency toward is building these echo chambers. So where people just share the same voice, and you hear, it's a cheerleading thing. I believe this. Well, I believe this. Yeah, aren't we great? And so research has found that actually, if you want to build dialogue online, you need diversity. And whereas offline communities often, you live in diversity because of where you live and you're but the internet, you have to actually cultivate that. And so there have been quite a few people experimenting with how do you build that, that diversity and that dialogue. But it's something, again, you have to cultivate, because it's not a default in the way that, the network is set up.
So interesting. I've talked about my daughter a couple of times, but when I first had her, I wanted support because I was a working mother with a PhD, so I went to an online community, maybe of the type that you study. And then I went deeper in, and I found people that were just sociologists who have one child who's a daughter and are struggling. And then I found that I was very interested if anyone else was also married to another academic. And lo and behold, there are sociologists with just one daughter who are also married to an academic. And then I wanted to find if there were people who dressed like me. I'm just kidding. So I was like, I found, blue jacket wearing sociologists who are married to an academic who have just one daughter. But so then you kind of are standing there alone, right? And so that's a kind of interesting thing to think about. To what extent does it divide, and what extent does it have the potential to unite? So in particular, related to polarization, to what extent has social media led to increased polarization over issues of religion and politics? It's definitely a yes or no answer. Yes, it's very not complicated question right there. So whoever grabs it first. Why am I trying to give away my mark?
In the 2016 elections, my course on religion and media, I had my students studying kind of memes, how memes talked about politics and religion together. And so we're looking at kind of the religion of different candidates. We're looking at kind of how religious identities got tied to different parties and whatnot. And one thing we found about is that the internet, especially if you talk about memes are, a popular culture image, like a movie star and a catchphrase, or it can be like Success Kid, you've probably seen him, with the blue background going like this and saying something popular. So they're good at kind of getting a sense of how people believe, or the assumptions they have, because they boil it down to these base elements and use a little bit of humor. And so we found, when they're looking at religion and politics, that it was easy to it was much easier to give a negative message or a critical message about religion and politics than a positive one. And just because a lot of memes use satire as the type of humor. But we also found that, what the religion they were talking about was a little bit different than how, as a religious scholar, I would see religion. So they were talking about religion in terms of civil religion. So to be religious is to have a certain political viewpoint. And so civil religion basically takes all the religions and boils it down to a basic spiritual belief. So it equates Islam and fundamentalist Christianity and Buddhism all together. Anyone that has these kind of beliefs and values. And so religion and politics online can be very divisive, because of how different digital media communicate. They kind of teach you to communicate in a very basic soundbite kind of way. They encourage you through the kind of medium to be in a very kind of negative way. And then they oftentimes do what we call essentialized religion. They kind of whitewash it down to and forget the nuances. And so then it presents a very bold view of religion and a very critical view of religion, but it's a very kind of watered down and problematic view of religion. And I think that's one of the things what a lot of digital media is a place, instead of just saying, oh, look at how bad they're framing different groups, or they're encouraging partisanship. This is a place where religious studies scholars, theologians, and the church need to use these as tools to talk about, okay, this is the assumptions, what is incorrect about this assumption, and how can we actually use this as a tool for dialogue rather than a tool just to throw up our hands and say, wow, they're just getting it wrong.
Yeah, I think the key word there that you used was dialogue, right? And social media is, at least, I think it's an incredibly difficult medium for like genuine dialogue instead of just kind of throwing, memes at each other and sound bites at each other. And that's because it's just such a narrow medium, right? And so if you just think about, right, the complexity of religion and faith, the complexity of politics, right? And you're gonna like try to drink all of that through this tiny little straw, right? And then like pass it on to someone else as if they can understand what you mean, right? So it's just, no wonder there is, even with the best of intentions, it's incredibly difficult to fully understand what someone is saying online, right? Even with as many emojis as you can try to nuance, right, what you're saying, especially if you're trying to be funny, right? And if you're trying to be funny, right, because that's half the point of being online, right, because that's what's going to get people to like and respond to you, then that's even more complicated because humor is incredibly complicated. So I think there's something about the medium of the computer mediation and the particular ways that social media is designed, right? The way the likes are designed, like, right? There's lots of ways that social media could be designed, right? We happen to be working with Facebook, Instagram, and Snapchat right now. It could be something else, right? And so that's where I'm kind of interested in, like, what, hey, designers out there in Silicon Valley, like, what's the other way to create the platform to help us actually have, or help us to have dialogue? I think as human beings, most of us, may have difficulty having dialogue, even in person, right? How do you help us to have dialogue with someone who holds a very different position? Or even the same, right, to fully engage the issue that you're trying to discuss.
Or, and just to add on to that, I think, what we as, kind of scholars who are interested in kind of creating cultivating, civil discourse, it's how can we hack the platforms that are there. It's like, oftentimes we say, oh, it's out of the box and this is how it works. And saying, how can we use actually our own creativity to kind of do these workarounds like you talk about in kind of gaming and design practice. How can we work around that to actually create a space? Maybe it wasn't what the designers created, but they allow this kind of loophole in there to do that. And I think we, especially when we talk about religion and digital culture, we need to kind of be more creative and not just take the technology as it comes to us, but see how can we use it to enhance experiences, enhance opportunities.
That's good. That's good stuff. So just show us the future a little bit, if you would. Even anecdotally is okay. So how do you think social media technologies will evolve over the next 5 to 10 years, or even the next year, the next week, whatever time period you feel comfortable with, and what impact will these evolutions or this evolution have on religious identity and practice in the U.S.?
I'll take my first crack. So I think social media is already becoming increasingly image and video oriented, right? Less text based, right? So I think the potential for storytelling continues to expand on that front, and it'd be great to have creative attempts to figure out how can you tell a story in a different way. Because our technology is mobile, I think social media is going to be gathering more and more data on our lives. That is, it's going to be tracking whatever we're willing to give over, where we are, what we do, what we're purchasing, right? If you have a Echo in your house, right? All those things, right? It's going to be pulling all that data in to inform the platform what to shoot back at us. So I think that our social media is going to be having a larger and larger voice kind of bringing some of that AI technology and kind of talking back to us in a particular way. And to me, in its impact on religion, I think there's a question of what is the master narrative for individuals? That is, if your faith, your religious commitments are supposed to be your master narrative, shall we say, of like how you engage life, how you live your days. And now there's this competing master narrative of a mobile and ubiquitous technology that knows a lot about you and knows it very well because it has all this data, perhaps knows us better than ourselves, right? That there is another voice then speaking back to us. What do we do with that voice? And that's where I think the question lies.
I would agree that I think we're moving into an era of, where augmented and smart technologies are becoming the standard. So, our social media not only is something we use to engage, but it's basically kind of personalizing the world back to us. We all have had that experience why, you make some kind of comment to somebody about your vacation and then you get certain kind of vacation ads and bikini ads popping up on your social media feed. Again, they're mining you for information and then they're kind of presenting the world that they think that you want. And again, then it requires, I think, again, the reality that they present is kind of, again, this homogenized, you won't like these things, and we're going to kind of pattern off all the other uses that if you like this, they like that and that. And so I think, what and there's some ways that I think religious communities need to push against those kind of narratives that are being created about us, about their expectations, especially the kind of encouraged branding and commercialization, that we are commodities to be kind of bought and sold in this era. So I think social media, instead of just accepting kind of that trend, is that we need to kind of, push against that and encourage people to say, how can we use the social media to, again, advocate for new ways of being rather than just kind of being passive kind of consumption bots.
Those are the questions that we have from the students, but now we'd like to open up the mics for those of you who'd like to ask questions of our panelists. So we have 2 mics at the end of each aisle. If you just come down and form a line if you have a question. I don't see people running, so the line forming may not be necessary, but if one person could start that off. If you could just keep your questions as questions, that would be great, just so we can get multiple speakers in. So thank you. Questioner?
Yes, I'm Kimberly Orr. I'm a pastor at Windsor Village United Methodist here in town.
Oh, great.
And I'm
here.
over education, so this is very interesting to me.
Yeah.
My question is, as we do push forward into the future, and you just mentioned AI and what it means to be human, both of you touched on that. What about the future of like cyber implants and people who are moving into this era? What does it mean to be incarnational in a sense in our religions? And what about that future and how humanity integrates with the technology?
That's a great question. Yeah, thank you for asking it.
Yeah, there's lots of talk right now about kind of the concept of the post-human. And so, one of the assumptions is that, that technology is something to be embraced because it's basically allowing us to evolve into these cyborgs or these transitional humans that will kind of then push us past the human evolution into this new state of being. Post-human discourse, an extreme is brain downloading, if you think of like, Johnny Depp's version in AI, or at least the idea that, kind of taking biotechnical kind of augmentation, whether it's for regenerative medicine or just to kind of enhance human abilities, should be kind of taken as the norm. So I think the first question we need to kind of ask is like that obviously these technologies, they're built on a philosophy of progress is good, that efficiency is the best way to go, and that we need to push toward enhancement. It's something that obviously within religious communities we need to talk about. What it means to be distinctly human, what is human uniqueness That's a very important kind of question. But alongside that, realizing that there is going to be this strong narrative and that that people are going to be moving that way. So how do we treat the technological other when we are becoming the technological other? You know, we're not yet at full AI, but there's a lot of hybrid individuals out there, whether it's people who take medicine, people that wear glasses. We all are embracing technologies in a way that we hadn't 100 years ago. And so I think, it's a very important era. People debate AI all the time, and we go, it's not now if our machines become smart, it's just when. It's already been experimented on, and I think we need to have a theological and an ethical framework that kind of says, how do we deal with that technological other amongst us?
I think most faith communities have in their theological resources, particular anthropologies, right, of what being human means. And if that involves a journey into accepting one's limitedness or finitude, having a clear understanding of the transcendent and what the transcendent is and how the human is related to that transcendence. To me, it's about how faith communities engage what is inevitably coming, right? I think is about faith communities needing to kind of dig into what they already have and take them more seriously and say, hey, what actually do we think incarnational means, right? And how do we take that seriously in this particular context? Because the technologies will keep changing and they'll be changing really fast, right? So social media is going to be like, that's like 8 little building blocks compared to what we're going to see. To me, I think, and like Heidi said, we've already encountered so many of these questions before with so much of biotechnology and end-of-life issues, right? It's very similar types of questions, just in different contexts. We're talking about enhancement here. In other contexts, we've talked about, again, engaging the nature of what is human. And so having those conversations in our faith communities, I think, is we've got to start having them somehow.
Hi, good evening. Gideon Salazar. Questions, it's two-part. If there's any studies or anything that showed maybe the impact of social media on what I would call maybe religious retainment. For example, somebody graduated from high school, they're in a conservative family, their child goes away to a state institution, and they're worried they're gonna, fall away from their faith. So is there anything that might suggest there's a level of religious retainment that social media plays in that family? And also, is there any maybe evidence on the impact of social media on religious conversions?
Oh, that's interesting. Good. So could social media be a way that you might keep in touch with a youth who's no longer physically a part of the community? You might keep in touch with them in terms of faith in a way that could be beneficial. Yeah, that's interesting.
I think that, a lot of research has shown that most students, by the time they actually get to college, their religious identity is set. It's either will go, stronger or kind of stay stable, but usually people's, religious identity doesn't shift much after their first or second year of college. And so I think that a lot of religious institutions, just by having some kind of digital presence and connection, becomes really important. I know in the last year and a half since Facebook's offered its live kind of feeds opportunity, that a lot of churches are now webcasting because it's very easy. You don't have to have expensive technology. And I know a lot of my students will talk about how they feel more connected to their religious communities back home because they're watching them on Facebook, or they're watching at least the youth services being streamed on a regular basis. So I think that there's a lot of that already happening, and I think communities can do that more. And also, again, just kind of showing people how the faith community is a 24/7 experience. It's not just a one day a week. Using social media to extend that becomes important. As far as a religious conversion, people have been using technology, since the the printing press, the radio, every technology. There's a whole E/evangelism movement that's been active since about 1997, with groups anything from the Billy Graham Association to different Muslim groups that have been very active in how do we develop websites and the best chat rooms for religious discourse and dialogue. So I think that that there's a lot of opportunities, and both learning from I think the groups that are doing it the best are kind of evangelical Christians, and then the Chabad Lubavitch Jews, and reaching out to kind of secular people in Jewish communities.
I defer to you on all of that.
Yes, well, I'd like to make a distinction here between cultural religiosity and scholastic or scholarly religiosity, because when you speak of community, there has always been a community within theology, and then there's a community within cultural religion. And I think social media, I'm a baby boomer, so I'm looking at this come at me versus being a part of it. And what I see a lot of in social media, what I've experienced is so much of it's about me. Look at me, look at me. Whereas community within a scholastic or scholarly religious understanding is about you, not about me. So my question is how is social media creating scholarly and a theological understanding of community versus understanding your cultural understanding of community? Like you said, finding like minds. You said, and I agree with you, and I like what you say, encouraging dialogue and encouraging, but our human instinct is to look at me, look at me. So how do you encourage, and how do you see that happening versus the downside of what social media can bring forth in that cultural religiosity?
Yeah, I just want to affirm kind of the trend that you're noting. Especially sociologists who study community and computer networks as communities, they would describe, a computer network is, as a social network, is different because, again, it's the individual at the center. So no longer is it the institution, the family, religion. The individual kind of, Mari says, this is who I'm connected to, this is how strong those ties are, and directed. So again, that gives a lot of freedom to the individual that kind of, maybe I wasn't able to have a voice in my religious community, maybe I had a very limited experience face-to-face, so the digital allows a much more robust and personalized freedom for engagement. But again, there's a sense of that if the individual's the center, where's the accountability? Where's the reciprocal nature and the reciprocity in that? And that's, I think, one of the challenges that in online community, the communities that are being formed are much more individualized. And so I think religious communities need to kind of say, hey, you can use your social network to build spiritual resources and information, but there's somebody else at the center there besides you. There's, the divine that's in there, and there's also a sense of accountability. And so, again, one of the problems is when a religious institution says, hey, we're just going to take a program out of the box to build online community, there's a couple values that are being cultivated in that space that may be antithetical to what the offline community or their theological identity is. So there's again, it's this two-edged sword that you have to kind of be aware of. This is what's created. How maybe then do we create an accountability network or investment? The internet's all about building this collective identity. But it's something, again, you have to kind of cultivate so that there's groups in the center and not just one individual.
Here again, I think what we find online is reproducing what we see already. So if you look at existing religious institutions, right, many of the very popular, the growing communities are focused on who, right? It's me, right? So social media might have its own way of increasing that focus, but I think there's already resonance in at least American religion. I don't know enough about other countries, and again, I'll say that about Christianity. I don't know about other faith traditions. I think your question is getting at soul formation. That is the content might be religious, but are the ways that we are engaging, the postures that we bring to that religious experience, is it being formed in such a way that is favorable, right? Favorable to the particular spiritual reality that faith community might be committed to, assent to, right? And so I think then we get to the question of, well, you know, hundreds of years of spiritual practices have existed to work on soul formation, right? And social media is certainly not the first of many things in our world that have misformed our souls, right? And so then the question is, what existing spiritual practices that a faith community might already have in its heritage, in its tradition, that might actually be really salient for social media, right? So given the ubiquity and mobility of social media, I think, you know, for example, a spiritual practice of solitude or silence, right, might be the kind of like really challenging type of spiritual practice that says, hey, you know, we are so deeply immersed in the social media experience, right, that we need to practice, right, how to do silence or how to do solitude in such a way that the transcendent, the divine can enter in, right? That we're not just hearing our friends' voices or other people shouting at us or ourselves kind of broadcasting to other people what we want them to hear. And so I think the resources are there. We just need to kind of pick out which are the ones that are kind of like hitting the pressure points that social media kind of raises.
Hi, I'm Sharon with Eagle Broadcasting. You've both made comments suggesting a sort of watering down of religion online, like religious words presenting in non-religious ways and mundane use of religion online. My question is, do you feel that this is a byproduct of the increased accessibility of religion, or would this have been, or would you imagine that this would have kind of happened more so with the times, even outside of the digital era? And if so, how would a religious institution kind of combat that?
I wouldn't say that it's really watering down religion, but what we're getting is that instead of one institution or community being in charge of its story, people have access to a lot of different stories and a lot of different interpretations. Those may not be official interpretations, they may be alternative at best, but I think that people are able to access, again discourses on theology, discourses on kind of religious identity, discourses on what it means to live out one's faith tradition in different spaces, and again, that may offer alternatives or stories that challenge the official storyline. So I think what we're seeing is then, you know, instead of going, and I've heard this when I've interviewed imams or rabbis or pastors, you know, where do people go for religious information? It used to be the local pastor. Now it's Rabbi Google or Imam Google or Pastor Google. You know, that's where they go for the religious information. And because of the way of the hyperlinks and digital media work, you don't just get one answer, you get 10, and so you get to choose which one fits best in your thing. So it does add a little bit more of a commodified commercial, I get to shop around, but that shopping around for religion is something Wade Clark Roof noticed with baby boomers, you know, that people, they don't go to the parish church down the street, they went to the parish church that met their needs and their, so this is kind of, it's the idea that the internet is just, putting on hyperdrives these trends that we already saw about people going, believing but not belonging, of shopping around for their religion, of feeling less inclined to a certain institution or official voices, and feel the freedom to affiliate or not affiliate. People used to, when they put out surveys, well, I have to put Christian, you know, and now people don't feel that constraint anymore because they've seen the more options out there, both in digital culture and in offline culture.
I think what we find online is just, it displays lived religion, right? Just, it is not the official, but it's just what people actually do, right? And so the memes, you know, that are put out are the posters that people have on their walls already. And so, you know, the sociologists of religion have been showing the decline in religious institutional participation for decades already. Other sociologists have shown how our commitments to the local have also been in decline, right? And these are where we have traditionally housed religious experience. And so I think just totally agree with Heidi, is that what we see online is a hyperdrive version of what was already kind of in play, which is why it's so which is why to me it's so compelling, right? It's not like social media is this really radical thing that suddenly we're like, oh my goodness, I need to figure out how to change my life to fit this. It's like, no, actually our lives were already kind of, we already had very disparate networks of social ties. We already were kind of detaching from the local because we're moving a lot. There are just lots of things already set in course so that when social media came, it was like, yeah, this totally fits my life, right? And I think it's the same with religion.
Hi, my question is, you made a good point that a lot of times data is returned to us according to what we like and what YouTube always recommends, the videos that you like. So my question basically is, how can social media reach those where maybe they've never liked certain types of messages, but how can social media reach them if, you know, they're not actively searching or looking? Because I know a lot of times, even with interests that we have, we just share it with our friends or our family, and then we know because we heard it by word of mouth. But with social media, how can it reach people that maybe normally wouldn't, or they wouldn't normally be receptive to it? Is it something that we can do from our end? Is it something that people can do from their end as far as searching? Or I know a lot of times people too, they put the Google ads, so of course it shows up purposefully. But is there a way that social media can do that, or?
I think, you know, one of the challenges of algorithmic culture is, you know, like it says, if you like this, you might also like this. But you never see, you haven't liked this, but so you should probably like this, you know. We don't do the exact opposite. And, you know, it's not advantageous for commercial companies, so that's probably, Google's not going to do that either. But I think what social media can do is, rather than relying on the structure of that kind of culture and how the information is working on the social ties. And so, you know, basically, you know, if you kind of go out and seek out relationships with people that are not like you, then you're going to have a diverse social network. You know, I was telling someone earlier that, you know, I've consciously tried to do that in my own life. So I have people who are fundamentalist Christians to Wiccans, and I have pro-Trump and anti-Trump supporters on my feed. So I've tried to consciously cultivate a diversity of perspectives. A, just for myself, but B, also just to kind of keep more aware of kind of what the public milieu. And so I think we can use our social networks to build relationships. So it's not going to be through the data, but it's through the relationships. And I think religious communities that kind of can teach their people how to cultivate, you know, an active, engaged presence in society, you know, diversify your friends, and then you'll have a space to speak.
Yeah, no, I think that's right on, that it is, you have to be proactive, right? You can't just wait for it to come. And in some ways, I mean, the first step is just knowing how it works, right? And realizing that, oh, this isn't reality, right? This is just what Google or Facebook is delivering to me because it's what I've been clicking. And then doing the workarounds, the hacking, right? And so, like, how do I get around that? Obviously, I would be interested now that Facebook is, you know, been implicated in all the election stuff, right? It's just interesting to see what Facebook will do if it has enough guts to kind of move away from the kind of very tried and true advertising revenue model and say, oh no, we're actually going to do something different here. We have some ethical concerns or some other greater goods that we need to be committed to, and so we're going to, you know, go here. I don't know I don't know if you have a thought on that.
Yeah, it's good. So technology for the social good, right? Hacking for diversity and dialogue, and what does that mean? So maybe we'll take you as the last question. Yeah.
Kimberly Kendall. Thank you for being here. You mentioned, and I'm a millennial, so you mentioned the offline, inline, online, and that probably resonated more with me because I kind of felt like everybody put everything online. And there was a way that I used to use the internet and social media as a tool versus my everything that it has come to be. What would you say in a perfect world would be the right percentage if you were to set up an organization for people in the religious context that you would say you should be online versus offline?
This is not a thin conversation.
A
right? Yeah,
percentage. I feel
this-
like I'm on a game show, you know, like roll this dial. Well, so when I have conversations like this, I often first say that I actually think each of us has different thresholds and different relationships with our devices. I think some of us are more prone to compulsive behaviors than others. Some of us are more image driven, you know. I'm hesitant first off to say, oh, well, it should be blah, whatever it is, because I think we just have different relationships with our technologies. And they have different, we have different, the technology has different levels of power over us. Maybe that's another way to put it, right? And why that is, that's complex, right? Lots of different variables might feed into that. I think the answer lies less in how much technology should I have in my life, and the answer should be more, what do I know as a person of faith I'm committed to? Like, what in the end of my life, when I look back, what do I want to have there? What do I want to have seen? And then you work backwards and say, well, how do I get to that, right? And I'm gonna guess that most of us, you know, aren't gonna be like, well, I will have wished that I spent 90% of my life on Facebook all the time, just click, you know, scroll, I mean, right? Like that would have been a completely fulfilling life, right? I mean, most of us aren't gonna say that. Maybe it will be, I really spent time with my friends and my family, right? I was really committed to them in a particular way. I really served them. I served my community in a particular way. Okay, well then work backwards. How do you get there, right? And is your current percentage, whatever that might be, is that helping you get to that life that you hope to live one day, and figure it out that way?
I kind of advocate being what I call techno-selective. And I get this from a colleague of mine, Brent Waters, who's written a lot on kind of technology, biotechnology. He talked about in one of his works being technoplane, like the Amish. So, you know, the assumption is the Amish are very conservative, they're against the modernity, and so they would be anti-technology. But that's not true. They even use the cell phone, but they see the cell phone as one individual owning a cell phone is problematic because that's an individualized technology, and their community is very important. The community comes above the individual. So the idea of being techno-selective or, you know, technoplane is saying, okay, what is the technology good for? How is it going to shape my practice? So how do I want to use it? And so I'm selective about what technology I use and how I use it. I'm very involved in Facebook because I've lived all over the world, literally. And so I have friends in about 20 different countries, the only way I would stay up with them. And so, you know, for me, being there and being present, letting them know where I'm at, but then also being able to drop them individual notes, I couldn't do that from any other technology. But I choose not to be involved in other platforms as extensively because of that. I also am a firm believer in taking technology fast from time to time, but also I believe, because of my work, I'll never be able to fully get off technology. Because of the work I do and when I research. And so it's kind of basically choosing, okay, what does this technology do well? How do I want to use it? How does that fit in with my faith commitment? And, you know, is it going to build the kind of world that I feel I'm called into? And so I think it's kind of a process of reflection rather than saying all technology is good, all technology is bad. It is both good and bad. How do I deal and negotiate within that space? And what kind of work, basically trying to build the world that you want to live in through how you use technology.
Wow, this was really good. Thank you to each of you for coming. Thank you to our embodied guests, and thank you to our online and virtual guests. The embodied guests will now get food. The online guests will have virtual food. This has not been a thin conversation. It was even more robust than I had even thought it would be, and my expectations for both of you knowing your work was already high. So I'm really grateful for the thought you put into this. Keep doing your great work. Thank you. So now go out those doors to our snacks waiting for you, and please stick around a few minutes to have in-person conversation. Thank you for being here again.